Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about the AFLs. And the AFLs was developed by James Partington, of course, whose name you know from the Ables, and he developed it with Mike Miller. And what they were trying to do was kind of take the technology that worked as an assessment tool in the Ables and extend it to older learners. One of the things that we often hear about, and you may have also felt, particularly those of you who work with adolescents and adults, is that it's not as relevant for learners with challenges in the areas of independent living, community participation. Those core skills in the ABLES, just like in the VB-MAP, are really crucial, and they remain relevant for older learners. But there's that whole other area of self-help and community-based living and things that really isn't reflected in it. So the AFLs really focuses on functionality, on what are the skills that people need for success in community living? What happens when we get beyond those early years of trying to get those foundation skills as established as we can? What do we need to focus on, and how do we best do that? And what are all the elements of functionality that are relevant for older learners on the spectrum? So the AFLs has 6 unique assessments that are embedded into it. They're in the areas of basic living skills, home skills, community participation, school skills assessment, independent living, and vocational skills. And it's designed to be very user-friendly. I think it's even more so than the ABLES, which, as you know, is quite easy. And most of you commented on that too, compared to the VB-MAP. It's a bit easier. It's more navigable for somebody who's new to it. You don't necessarily need to go to a workshop to understand what to do with it when you see it. And like that, the AFLs is very much kind of what you see is what you get, and everything that you need to do is fairly straightforward and kind of right there for you. It's designed to be completed by caregivers. It doesn't have to be a behavior analyst. It doesn't have to be, a credentialed person. It can be direct care workers. And the level of specificity in the questions really makes it ideal for it to be completed by caregivers. However, as a source of information, even though caregivers are a primary source of information, it's important not to over-rely on one. So the developers recommend using several caregivers in case that person's perceptions might not be entirely accurate, in case performance is variable across various caregivers. The likelihood that we will get the best data then really comes from several sources in the form of caregivers. In addition to caregivers, we look at direct observation. You wouldn't expect to see a behavior analytic assessment that doesn't focus on direct observation, and so the AFLs definitely does that. And that's really crucial in terms of having real-world samples of that person's abilities in those areas. And then the third area is the formal presentation of demands or tasks. Not done as much, but you could run through a particular skill with somebody if you were not sure of the scoring, if you had mixed information from caregivers, if you couldn't get consistent sampling yourself. But there is a caveat to that, which is they recommend not assessing skills with inherent risks or danger, or skills that involve the use of appliances or sharp implements. And there's a huge focus throughout the AFLs on safety in assessment and in teaching, the need for constant supervision, great care when exposing them to things that could have danger associated with them. In terms of scoring, it's very much like the ABLES. So the score you give should be their typical performance, what they generally do, not on their best day, not on their worst day, but generally what we see. There is an emphasis on underestimating, rather than overestimating. It is better to underestimate someone's abilities than to overestimate it, because we don't want to aim too high in what our skill goals are. You can score mid-range, so you could give somebody essentially a 2.5 by circling both 2 and 3. You can go back and score that up as something more precise later, but it does allow for you to score in the mid-range. Like the ABLES, updates are generally done a minimum of yearly, but for very fast learners, it can be done more quickly, say every 4 to 6 months, but again, that would just be for very rapid acquisition. For this particular instrument, unlike the ABLES or the VB-MAP, it's generally pretty easy to update. The kinds of skills we're working on are longer term, require more intervention over longer periods of time, and so your updates are not going to be as dramatically different as they might be for some of those other instruments that we've looked at. Partington does emphasize a number of essential skills, which I think are really interesting when you think about the utility of teaching various kinds of foundation skills. So he talks about flexibility as being an essential skill and something that we ought to be working on from the beginning of our work with individuals with autism because of the amount of variability in all of our daily lives and in all the environments that these individuals are likely to encounter. He also talks about direction following in a number of different ways, following spoken directions, following directions in context. Understanding receptive language as a core foundation skill that has implications for safety and independent living is really important. And I think Partington really makes that point by talking about this response class of responsivity that's really an essential skill set for success in community-based programming as well. He also talks about staying in a designated area, so waiting for a caregiver, not wandering. That's hugely important. He talks about positive social interactions, which I think makes a lot of sense in terms of what we've said about making this individual a source of reinforcement to others so that other people in their living and work environments will want to interact with them, so that their parents, who are probably quite weary of all of the demands of parenting a special needs child for all these years, would also have a lot of very positive interactions with them as well, that staff would find them fun to work with despite whatever challenges they may also exhibit. So I think that's an important one to include as we talk about essential skill sets as a foundation. He also talks about walking and traveling with caregivers, staying with someone as an essential safety skill, appropriate behavior in vehicles as well, in terms of making sure that from the beginning, when we're working even with younger learners, that we're looking at some of these core abilities that are going to take them into adolescence and adulthood more successfully. Fundamental self-help skills, including health and grooming, are in there as well. That's important for health reasons for the individual, but also in terms of how that individual is perceived and valued by members of the broader community. So I think it's realistic to include that and discuss that. He also mentions unusual reactions to specific sights and sounds. We do know that many individuals with autism have sensory sensitivities and may react to certain elements of their environment. And I think it's very interesting that it's included here in terms of a vulnerability that these individuals might have. So it kind of tells us from an assessment perspective, do we have any of these kind of warning signs that we need to be thinking about in terms of replacement skills, self-management, giving them escape hatches for these kinds of circumstances in those environments. Also talks about independent leisure skills, very important. You know, I always think that we have a tendency to focus on play and then forget about leisure once they get to a certain age. Leisure skills need to be a focus of our curricular programming well into adolescence and adulthood in order to build this person's ability to fill their time in meaningful ways. They also talk about following routines. We think about that a lot in school, but it's also important in work and in community life. There are a lot of unwritten rules and scheduled kinds of events in those contexts as well. And the generalized use of skills. And I think generalization, like functionality, is one of these core issues in adolescent and adult programming, because we have to think about what are the environments and stimuli this person's likely to encounter. Think about going to a public restroom where the toilet may flush differently, the sink may come on differently, the options for drying your hands may not be at all like the ones that are available at home. And so we have to think about, is this person ready from a stimulus generality and a response generality perspective to respond to different stimuli, to alter their responses in small ways to meet the demands of those stimuli in effective ways without needing adult assistance. That's the essence of independence in community living. So there are a number of different areas, as I mentioned, that are focused on. I'm going to start with basic living skills. The basic living skills area is developed and broken into self-management, basic communication skills, dressing, toileting, grooming, bathing, health, safety, and first aid, and nighttime routines. I'm going to look at two of those with you. I'm going to start by looking at self-management. I think it's so interesting to put that in as a basic living skill, but it truly is. And again, that's one of the advantages of looking at a well-designed instrument for this population of learners, is it tends to have a lot of validity for the challenges that we have on a daily basis. I got to put on my reading glasses for this one. The first one is aggression toward others, and you'll notice that a 0 is frequent aggression in a variety of settings. A 1 is demonstrates occasional aggression in a predictable setting or situation. 2 has none. Also talks about self-injurious and disruptive behavior. Following directions from multiple caregivers is number 5 in that area. Again, you see that focus, right, on generality that's embedded throughout these instruments. Remains calm appears in many different ways within this one. So remains calm when there's a change in direction when walking or riding in a car. Remains calm when required to wear different shoes or different clothing. Remains calm when loud or unexpected noises are present is number 12. Remains calm when the schedule is changed, number 13. Number 14, in sudden unexpected events. We all know that behavioral regulation is a huge challenge for many learners on the spectrum, and remaining calm in novel situations is particularly difficult. What's great is to see that operationally defined in a self-management curricular assessment. And I think it's really a very, very novel and creative way to assess self-management. Also, continued remaining calm when group or friend makes a decision that they must follow is number 18. Remains calm during hygiene and grooming routines is number 19. Number 20, allows hair to be cut. Any one of you who've worked with individuals with autism long enough has unquestionably worked on desensitizing individuals with autism to that particular challenge. It's a common one. Number 21, refrains from touching others' possessions. Number 23, complies with various authority figures. 24, takes appropriate action to deal with wrongdoing by others. And 25, asks for reasonable modifications in the environment. You'll notice that those last few items also have a self-advocacy flair, which is a skill deficit in this population of learners and a really important living skill for individuals on the spectrum. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor for some of the content of self-management. Similarly, I want to look at the last one in there, which is nighttime routines. And nighttime routines starts off very simply with a very basic requirement of goes to bed when told. That's item number 1. Number 2, goes to bed at a set time. Number 3, gathers desired bedtime items. And then you see the beauty of the task analysis thinking, the behavior analysis in this particular assessment. It includes item number 4, closing the drapes or windows. Turning on or plugging in a nightlight, number 5. Number 6, turning off the lights. Number 7, falling asleep without an adult present. Number 8, sleeping in their own bed all night. Those are all things that have huge implications for levels of independence. If they cannot do that, someone else is doing it for them. Someone else is closing the drapes. Someone else is turning off the light. Someone else is staying with them to make sure they fall asleep. So to the extent that these things are indicated as not present, they're impediments to independent living. They're going to hold them back from higher levels of independence in terms of settings that are available to them. So it's so important to include those particular ones in here. Some additional ones, setting the alarm clock, following all the steps to get ready for bed, again focused on independence, independently going to bed at the appropriate time, sleeping adequate numbers of hours, getting up independently in the morning when an alarm clock rings. And just like the ABLES, these are developed with a focus on functionality and independence and consistency in that regard. And it gives us a lot of specific information about how many of these sub-skills the individual has in their possession and where we need to target to increase independence in socially significant ways. Again, getting us back to our ultimate outcomes of highest level of independent living possible. So those are 2 of the areas that were involved in the basic living skills assessment. There are so many areas you could look at in this one or in any of the others, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of those. Now we're going to look at the the community participation skills booklet, which is comprised of basic mobility, community knowledge, shopping, eating in public, money, phone, time, and social awareness and manners. I'm going to start with basic mobility. And again, it starts off at the most basic level and moves up through various kinds of complex mobility issues. The first one, watching where walking. But how many of us have worked with learners who do not watch where they're walking, and that requires somebody within arm's reach at all times. So it's extremely important for community independence. Next item is curbs and step. Next item is walking with appropriate posture, gait, and speed. Next one is engaging in appropriate actions while walking. Doesn't talk to themselves, sing to themselves, make unusual faces. Are they engaging in behaviors which are going to make people avoid them, feel uncomfortable around them? Or are they engaging in behaviors that are acceptable to the larger community and likely to help them integrate successfully? The reason why those items are included here is because these are the items that limit community participation. Staying beside caregiver, staying on the sidewalk or path, again, that meta message of safety is very, very much embedded into this progression as well. Stops at the street, comes back, went to a caregiver when they're called, asks for permission to touch dogs belonging to others, presses the button to get the crossing light, looking both ways. And then there's a lot of items about looking for danger in parking lots and on the street, understanding cars and the risk that they serve. Can they walk to familiar places? Number 17, carrying correct information, credit card, and phone when out in the community. So are they equipped to deal with things? Would they be able to hand someone information about who they are? Would they be able to navigate in that situation? Safely opening car doors from outside of a car is number 20. From inside a car is number 21. Buckling their seatbelt, etc. Operating dashboard controls, operating car windows, using revolving doors. There's also items on use of escalators and elevators, which include being able to find them, get on them appropriately, follow social norms like don't stand too close to a person in an elevator, keep your distance, pushing the appropriate floor, riding the elevator appropriately, again, engaging in behavior that's not likely to be off-putting to others in the broader community. Exiting the elevator appropriately at the floor they're supposed to. And then there are items about public transportation, accessing it, navigating it appropriately, getting off at the appropriate destination. And so you can see that basic mobility area covered everything from being able to walk without falling, just outside your door, to being able to take public transportation effectively and independently. And again, the focus there is all about independence and about the need for someone to be close by. To the extent that we can have an individual score more highly on that, they have many, many, many more options in their life for that. Social awareness and manners is the last section there, and I'm going to look at that one with you too. So this is an interesting section too, and very important for community participation, because many individuals with autism get into trouble not because of skill deficits, but because their behavior makes others uncomfortable or frightened or worried in some way. And so we want to think about social awareness and manners to help increase their positive outcomes in social contexts, including work and community living. So it starts off again real easy. Returning greetings. Because if we don't return greetings, we're not a good community participant. We're not doing what others are expecting from us. Saying thank you, saying excuse me, looking at the issues of interrupting others' conversations. Number 9, apologizing and correcting mistakes. Number 10, respecting personal space. Number 12, knowing when to hold the door for others. Again, we're trying to make them reinforcers to others in their environment. Number 13, knocking on the door before entering a house. Asking before borrowing items belonging to others is number 15. Number 19, making sure that from a conversational perspective, our volume, our proximity, and the nature and content of our conversation matches those variables appropriately. Number 22, introducing themselves. 23, introducing friends and family to others. 25, discussing personal information only with appropriate individuals. Again, that's a bit of a self-advocacy, self-protection. We know that these people are vulnerable and likely to be targeted in some ways. Displaying good sportsmanship, showing concern for the feelings of others, number 29. Number 30, refraining from criticizing others. Number 32, doesn't intentionally talk about subjects that upset others. So some consideration that we'd like to operationally define too. What does it mean to be considerate? Well, it may mean that we don't talk about things that we know are going to be upsetting to other people, that we don't brag, which is item number 33. 35, that we can identify sarcasm and genuineness in statements made by others. Taking turns conversing in groups is number 37. Number 41, responding appropriately to peer pressure. 42, to teasing, and 43, to bullying. Again, this self-advocacy piece is enormously important. As individuals spend more time in less protected settings, we need to make sure they have the skill set to identify when someone's behaving inappropriately toward them and to advocate for themselves for assistance in order to get out of those situations. Number 45, again, remembering we're trying to make these individuals likable to others too. Telling jokes, telling funny stories. And number 47, identifying and dealing with social anxiety. We do know that social anxiety can co-occur with autism, as we talked about in the intro course, in comorbidity. And so we don't want to ignore that. That may be an additional set of skills that they need in terms of managing their anxiety as the demands for community participation increase, where things become less predictable and where skills may need to be manifested in more generalized kinds of ways and contexts. So hopefully, this gave you a little bit of an overview to the AFLs. Your assignment this week is going to be to take several of those threads. I just went through 4 different threads with you. You can choose whatever appeals to you from within the subsets that they focus on as core areas of skills in independent living. And see what you think about how this assessment would assist you in meeting the needs of learners on the spectrum at all ages, but especially adolescents and adults, and how it helps us as clinicians develop appropriate goals for individuals in these areas. So thanks for your attention. I hope you enjoy the instrument. Feel free to let us know any need you have for assistance or for interpretation of any of this. And I hope you have a good week and that you enjoy this particular week's topic. So thanks. Talk to you soon.